Welcome to our viewers. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today, Office 365 Backup. It's essential. Joining us today are Amit Rilani, Director of Alliances at Cloudian, and Corinne Bassett, Technologist at Veeam Software. Welcome, Amit and Corinne. With that, I'll hand it over to Corinne.
Thank you for having us. We have a great presentation around our partnership with Veeam and Cloudian together. So just a summary of what we're going to be going over today. We're going to talk about the adoption rate that we're seeing for Office 365, some of the risk and inherent risk that comes with those users, what reasons you may need to consider for backing up, and then we're going to get a little bit deeper into how Cloudian helps enhance Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365 options for you. And of course, a demo at the end, which is personally one of my favorite parts. Now, within a matter of a week, we saw that 44 million new Teams users were added to the Office 365 environment, bringing the total users up to 200 million, which are a ton of users. But when we saw that accelerated adoption rate, we kind of missed some of what might be other inherent risks, especially with what we're dealing with, which are remote devices. I have Teams and my email and my SharePoint, my OneDrive on my home computer. I have it on my work computer and all of my mobile devices in between, because it makes it easy to move that data from place to place. And not to mention collaborative sites like SharePoint, allowing you to have it on multiple devices for multiple people. But these remote devices often don't have the latest security patches. They're not on your domain, meaning they're not a part of the GPO that requires them to have those critical security patches that come down the line that an administrator would know to apply. But on my home computer, I don't feel like rebooting it today because it says it has a patch. And we come to home routers. Many home routers do not have things like a physical firewall or a properly configured firewall that you would find within an office building. A trained administrator that knows the ports that should be shut down or can monitor, it's their job to monitor erratic traffic on your network to know that there's a virus somewhere. It's not necessarily something your everyday user is going to know how to look for or even how to prevent in the long run. And public Wi-Fi, I think all of us have known for years that public Wi-Fi is just a breeding ground for all kinds of attacks. And having that education to know that you need to connect to a VPN whenever you're on any type of public network, otherwise you're pretty much giving your credentials out to anyone around you, and even those people that you can't see that are sitting out in their car. You have to be very careful and mindful and educate your users how all of these new devices that are connecting into your Office 365 environment open you up for vulnerabilities of your data. And that takes us into 6 reasons why you want to back up your Office 365 environment, and these are the types of data loss that you can experience. We start with, of course, accidental deletion. I've deleted something accidentally. Amit, have you deleted something accidentally? Just going through and not realizing it and deleting something?
Absolutely, especially the way I am. I end up deleting a lot of things accidentally, more so than I should.
Right. And backup retention policies. Misnomers are not fully understanding the way that your software is natively protecting you and assuming that's going to be everything that you need. Those gaps can be a huge reason to why you might lose data. And internal security threats. Talking about rogue administrators, disgruntled employees, it happens. Every business happens. You can be Google and still have a disgruntled employee. And external security threats. So those malicious outsiders, ransomware hitting your network, anything that's procreating through and stealing your data or destroying your data is just as critical. Legal and compliance reasons. This is one that I see overlooked, I would say, the most. Knowing what regulatory requirements that your business needs and sharing that with your administrator. There are a lot of times that your legal or HR department would know exactly how long that they need to keep that data for, and they haven't shared it with their IT department, letting them know, and they just assume that it's protected when it's not. And that can be a huge problem when it comes to discovery and e-discovery. And I think we still very much live in a hybrid world, and sometimes managing where your data's at, thinking it's one place when it's actually not on the other, can open you up to that really accidental loss or malicious loss. Veeam did a survey. We surveyed over 1,500 people and asking them, what was a way that you lost data? And the top answer was accidental deletion. I would say, especially with these collaborative platform types that Office 365 offers, it's not just you accessing that SharePoint site, it's everyone that you've shared it with, and then external collaborations with other businesses. So many more people are accessing that same data point. I can only see the number for accidental deletion or user error going up in this case. And we found out 6 out of every 10 organizations are not protected. They don't meet their search requirements, their governance requirements. They don't meet their backup requirements for this data, which is very much your intellectual company data that's not being protected here. We see a lot of this misconception come through for users or administrators thinking data is being protected by Office 365. They're responsible for the infrastructure. They must be responsible for protecting that data. But in reality, you're responsible for that data segment. We've known Microsoft is phenomenal at geo-redundancy, fault domains, update domains, availability sets. Microsoft has just taken huge strides in making sure that your data is available, your authentication servers are available. But when it comes to that underlying data and the long-term retention, that's actually under the responsibility of the customer. And Microsoft has actually come out and gave us a great breakdown of what they do protect and don't protect, and this is within what they call the shared responsibility model. The shared responsibility model covers all of their cloud offerings, whether you're working with platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, or software as a service. And it breaks down how far Microsoft protects depending on what kind of service that you have selected. In the case of Office 365, that's going to be software as a service. And primarily, Microsoft is responsible for that infrastructure section. When you're responsible for who has access to that data, who are you allowing to access and modify that data, whether it's a malicious access through those same credentials or a misguided user trying to access those same credentials. The supporting technology is there is a native sense of replication, and there is a hard and soft delete cycle in Microsoft, which goes to their recycling bin. But this usually is far less and doesn't go back as far as you need to fully protect that data. You are responsible for your full data retention. When it comes to security, they make sure that they give you the tools, they make sure that they give you the compliance or their availability or their access server specifications, but you giving your credentials out to your end users makes you responsible for the data that they access with those credentials. And when you start to think about all of those sectors together, this can leave you open to either limiting the access control of your data in Office 365. We will hammer it to death, which is regulatory exposure. security vulnerabilities causing an issue, or even just misconceptions in that retention policy gap. And just to see it in full chart form, a lot of the hard and delete cycles that's offered within Microsoft Office 365 is for 30 days. A soft delete means that you're still able to access and recover that data, not necessarily export it, and there are some limitations on the way that you can recover that data, but it's still accessible for that 30-day period. After that, it enters what's called the hard delete cycle, meaning that you're no longer able to access that information. Looking at the field, we have discovered that it's usually around the 140-day mark that any user or most organizations realize that they're missing data. And this includes if an employee leaves your company and your administrator goes in, revokes their account, removes all of their access, which any good administrator would do. But if, say, 90 days later, they come back saying that you stole some type of intellectual property from them and they're suing you for the rights to that property, and you can't prove that they developed it under your time, you're probably not going to win that lawsuit. So having the ability to come back and give data for any type of legal holding can be invaluable in these types of cases. And we come in with Veeam and Cloudian working together to give you a full retention of that data. And I know this chart only goes and says 5 years, but there's a little arrow if you see. We can protect everything. We can protect from the beginning of time if that's what you would choose or that's what you need for your compliance. We get a lot of questions about what about the E3 and E5 license with litigation holds. And the best answer to that, having a legal solution to a technical problem isn't the right answer. And it said best here by Achana, who is an IDC analyst. She's done some amazing research on the Office 365 environment, the risk that comes with business continuity, your security and vulnerability of loss, and the E3 and E5 license don't have an adequate protection control for you. And coming more into the solution to this problem, Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365. We're able to protect your data from that accidental deletion that's opened up by those retention policies, but we also give you the flexibility to restore data in the way that you need it in your environment. It's not just back to the original location. We can restore to new locations. We can export that data. And we don't just export that data or give it to you in a format of raw. We give it to you in a format that makes sense for that application. The best example is saying restore for Microsoft Exchange. We're able to export that as a PST or an MSG file, which are those native file formats you would expect to receive from these native applications, letting you meet your compliance and regulation with your e-discovery. We have advanced searches, and all of our engines have more than 100 different fields that you can search through, whether it's SharePoint, OneDrive, or your Exchange email. You can search for the data you need. This is another industry standard that's come out, and this chart and these main 6 points are a solutions checklist. What Office 365 solution should be able to offer to its end user and meet these qualifications for you to consider going with that provider. And we start with what features does it offer? Are you only going to have an on-premises solution? Are you going to have a cloud solution? Are you going to have a hybrid environment? Can you support Microsoft Teams? What type of restore scope do you have? Can you just restore back to the original location, new locations? All of these features are very important, and knowing that when you have an administrator in charge of this, it's easy to use. Coming to flexibility and choice, knowing that you have the ability to move from an on-premises environment for your storage when it makes sense to a cloud environment when that makes sense. Amit, I know that you guys offer an expansion on that with your Cloudian side.
Absolutely. So Cloudian is, and I'll get to some of this in my section, but Cloudian is a pure S3 based object storage system for on-prem deployment. And the idea of using Veeam and Cloudian together, you are getting a standardized approach to storing Office 365 or backing up Office 365 data into an S3-based target. Now, with an S3-based target, everything is standardized. So at some later point, if you want to move your applications onto a different storage vendor, as long as they support the standards, you can do that. And any application built specifically on Cloudian will work with other S3-based object storage vendors as well. So for that, you can get the flexibility, and the whole idea is built based on standards so that you can have the openness of the community coming in.
Yeah, and innovation, knowing that the platform that you choose has an innovation like advanced e-discovery, implementing something that's easy to use. And we're going to take a look in the demonstration later, but the console and all of the Explorers have a very similar look and feel, so it doesn't feel like you're walking into something strange whenever you need to restore something. Your backup administrator doesn't have to be necessarily an expert in SharePoint or Exchange to be able to restore data that they need back in their environment. And that can be very crucial, especially with us being IT administrators in the field wearing so many hats. You don't usually have the luxury of having one application as a specialty. Scaling out the environment, being able to go from a small environment to a large environment when it makes sense for your business to move up. Amit, you said that Cloudian also helps provide great scaling capabilities for what makes sense for that business.
Absolutely. And as a platform, Cloudian is built for scale. Our biggest value prop is with being built on S3-based object storage platform. We have almost infinite scalability, and unlike some of the other platforms, we start at a very small granularity step. So you can start with Cloudian in a 3-node cluster and scale the cluster to hundreds of nodes. And in the field, we have Cloudian clusters running, managing storage systems of more than 200 petabytes in the field in deployment today. So from a scalability perspective, you would be getting one of the most scalable platform out there today with Cloudian.
That's a great insight, which I think takes us directly into our next point, the integrations, making sure you have native integrations with Office 365, and that just tails back to having a restore process that makes sense to the applications that you're trying to restore back to. We restore back the native formats to those environments. And to your point, Amit, scaling for a large ecosystem, which opens up the door to those service providers. Sometimes backup as a service is the right solution for you, and being able to have that as a choice. And one of my favorite terms when it comes to cloud is the hyperscale clouds, meaning that our on-premises idea of what hyperscale is just taking that step further into the infinite bounds of what we can offer in cloud. And S3 storage, you can't walk into a seminar without saying everyone's working on that S3 storage, and being compatible is important when you're looking at a backup for Microsoft Office 365 provider. Now, breadth of service. Breadth of service means that you offer more. You don't just offer something niche or something specialty, but you offer a platform of services for someone to be able to work with. And Veeam as a whole is able to do that with the physical backup infrastructure, virtual backup infrastructure, and even cloud native backup that we offer. And they all integrate in with Cloudian, giving you that extra scalability in that platform. Now, object storage. Object storage, I think, was one of our most requested features back in version 3, and everyone wanted it because why would you necessarily want to bring all of that data back on premises, or where would you like to control that data? And Cloudian HyperStore allowed you to be able to have the flexibility, whether you're on premises or in the cloud, to have that S3 storage compatibility and cross-platform, which allows you to reduce costs because you're not paying for all of that equipment necessarily up front. You're using a pay-as-you-go cycle, having your OpEx and taking away from maybe some of those data expenses so you can expand another part of your business. The unlimited scalability type of that S3 storage, and it's really just simple. Being able to just target a single storage unit to have it scale out to where you need it to be. I don't know if we have any storage admins on the phone, but thinking about always having to expand that storage and how you're mathematically going to have to do that, I can say has probably kept you up at night before. And that brings us into exactly what Cloudian can offer, especially with the hardening. Amit?
Exactly, and yeah, so that was a great primer into the Office 365 bit, right? And what we're trying to do here is obviously talk about what would be the target for storing or backing up all the data with VBO, and where would it land? Well, in comes Cloudian HyperStore. So just introducing what we are and how we fit into the picture. A Cloudian HyperStore is definitely an S3 compatible object storage. Very clearly, we are an on-premises object storage. Why on-premises is important is specifically for the Office 365 data. In a lot of large companies, in a lot of enterprises, you will see that the data that you have in your office environment could be sensitive, and you want, even if it is an as-a-service offering, you want to be able to back up your data in your own control and be able to scale this infinitely at your control, so to speak, behind your firewall. So Cloudian HyperStore gives you that capability of having an S3 storage system behind your firewall and scalable to the level that you need it. With HyperStore, you can start small and you can scale into hundreds of petabytes. It is ideal for the hybrid cloud because you can start, this can be your transition into an S3-based cloud backup where you have your applications that land into Cloudian, and we can tier it beyond that into the public cloud as well. Any application that's built for HyperStore will work with a cloud that is built on S3 and supports S3. The use cases that you can do with, you can execute with Cloudian start with backup and archive. So Office 365 backup is one of our key use cases. Veeam is our primary partner of choice for the Office 365 backup. We have multiple customers using Veeam Cloudian solution for exactly that. We also have solutions that range from security surveillance, media entertainment, ransomware protection, and ransomware protection as a service is one of our fastest growing and one of the newest solutions that's there in the market. And of course, storage as a service, Internet of Things. All of these services and use cases require large-scale storages, and Cloudian HyperStore with its native S3 support has become one of the best storage platforms out there for an on-prem deployment for these things. The key features, again, we are built on S3 for S3 workloads, and we are native S3. Why that's important, I'll mention that in the next slide. but suffice to say, we are the closest you get to being a pure S3 platform after AWS S3 is. And AWS S3 is the public cloud. You can get the same functionality or similar functionality with on-prem with Cloudian. Okay, policy-based steering, policy-based data retention, multi-tenancy QoS billing, all of these are key features which has made Cloudian a successful platform. Now, from a deployment options that you have, Cloudian is available as an appliance, but our DNA is software-defined storage. So you can bring any x86 hardware and run Cloudian on top of that, and we would be just fine. And we also have a metered and consumption model available for those who want an OpEx model of Cloudian. So coming to S3, why 100% native S3 APIs matter? Well, if you look at what an S3 API does is any kind of an S3 call that you do gets distributed across the nodes that form the Cloudian system, and they are addressed as you receive them from various nodes in a distributed fashion. So the load is distributed. There is no need to translate S3 into your native API that you handle at the storage level, and therefore your performances are better, your read performance, your write performance, everything is pretty straightforward. Some of the other vendors that support S3 but are built natively on either a file format or another proprietary API format will have a translation layer. Pretty much it's a gateway where your API calls, S3 API calls will come, they get translated into the native format. And there is always a cost to the translation. This becomes very important for things like Office 365 backup, because during the retrieval, you will definitely see a performance impact coming in when the calls are getting translated and you are in a crunch to retrieve that lost email or that lost SharePoint document and so on and so forth. So inherent interoperability and scalable architecture are what a native, 100% native S3 API gives you. Scalability, as I mentioned, Cloudian is built for scale. We can start as small as 100 terabytes with a 3-node configuration and scale limitlessly into the exabyte range. Our largest clusters today are in the 225 to 250 petabytes in the wild out there, and they're deployed and running as we speak today. And finally, this particular solution is MSP ready with complete multi-tenancy. So MSPs can take the Veeam and Cloudian solution and build a service offering right off the bat. It is a revenue-ready service offering which comes pre-built with role-based access, quality controls, quality of service, monitoring, encryption, and even billing inbuilt into the system. You can have multiple tenants having their own backups in the Cloudian HyperStore and be completely segregated, and you can offer this as a service. And in fact, we are seeing a lot of traction in that particular thing. Even if you are a large enterprise and you have central IT that services multiple business units, you want to potentially keep the workloads of each business unit separate. You will definitely benefit from the multi-tenancy capabilities, also the access controls, and so on and so forth. So this particular feature, specifically from an Office 365 backup perspective, becomes the key to having a successful deployment. And of course, this is one of your key business data. Your Office 365 has become the lifeblood of most of the organizations. So keeping this data secure is important. With Cloudian HyperStore, you get a hardened solution. So If you look at the security certifications that Cloudian has, they range from the data immutability worm certifications like SEC Rule 17A4, FINRA Rule 4511, and so on and so forth. We are also certified secure by governmental agencies. We have the SIP certifications, we have common criteria, and we are also en route to get a lot of security certifications in the by the European agencies. In addition, Cloudian and Veeam connection is always secure, so the data in motion is secured by SSL connection. The connection is over HTTPS, as well as the data that resides in Cloudian. You can have 256-bit server-side encryption along with other mechanisms like having a secure shell, integrated firewall, role-based access controls, IAM access controls, and so on and so forth. So overall, what you get is a completely secured solution to secure your most valuable assets in the organization. Very quickly, I'm going to touch upon the visuals of how the solution works, and Karen will go into the details after this slide. What you're getting with the Veeam Cloudian solution is the capability of backing up all of your Office 365 data, whether it's Office 365 online or it's Exchange on-prem. You can back up everything through the Veeam VBO V4. VBO V4 has native S3 connectivity. As Karen mentioned, it is a direct-to-object backup. You do not need any layers in between. It will directly back up your data into S3-based object storage like Cloudian. We mentioned that this particular solution is completely secured, and one thing that I do want to mention is with the data immutability worm certification with Cloudian, you can even have immutable bucket as target on the Cloudian side, and from that compliance use case, you can make this data completely immutable so that you can have complete control on the data and who touches it and who can edit or manage that data going forward. Quickly touching on the profitable business model for MSPs, as mentioned, the solution, both Veeam and Cloudian are completely multi-tenant and support every feature that is important to offer this as a service. If you look at Office 365 protection as a service, and you'll find quite a few SaaS offerings out there, the service that you can build with Cloudian and Veeam, you will be able to cost it at a much more economical point and be able to create a profitable solution very, very quickly. With that, I'm going to pass it back on to Karen to get into how it works and potentially the demo after that. Karen?
Yeah, getting into the infrastructure, now that we've taken a look at what Microsoft Office 365 offers, or Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365, and the Cloudian side, this is what it looks like from a high level. From a single platform, you're able to back up the on-premises Exchange and SharePoint, as well as the Office 365 in the cloud, your Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and of course OneDrive, without having to have multiple pieces of software in your environment. Then you have the flexibility to either send it to your on-premises local storage through Cloudian or to the public cloud through a service like Cloudian, meaning that you can have the data where you would like to have that. And to kind of press again, we're 3 different explorers. Each explorer is tailored towards the application that we're working with to restore that data back to, and it restores it back in a sense that makes sense to the application we're working with. You can even send an email with that data to another user. So say you get a ticket into your system, I need a SharePoint document. Instead of restoring it back to the original location because you're not sure if the user needs to keep the original document, wants to override the document, you could just go ahead and send an email, attach that document back to that user, and that also avoids having to download it locally, attaching it somewhere else, or figuring out how else you're going to get that user the data they've requested, which kind of just gives you an ease of access as an IT administrator so you can go back to do what the rest of your job entails other than recovering data for other people. Now, again, this is one of my favorite parts. It's a demonstration. It's going to take a look at the console itself and what that restore looks like in the process. So this is the Veeam Backup from Microsoft Office 365 platform. It's fairly straightforward. We try not to clutter anything up. Whenever you're first adding something in, you'll go back down under your backup infrastructure, and you can add in your object storage to start. This is the Cloudian S3 compatible storage type. And here, all you need to do is have your service endpoint, which data center region you're using, and of course the credential keys to be able to access that storage in the bucket. And you have your folder inside of that bucket. So you could have multiple pay centers within that same place, and then you can limit the amount of data that's being sent there so you don't breach a consumption that you've already pre-configured at another point. Once you've added in the S3 storage, you actually have to configure it into a repository. Now, this repository has something that's called a local cache. Now, this local cache is fairly important in the process because it keeps some metadata for all of your folders locally. So all of the blocks being sent up, anytime you need to do a research, like a search for a file or look through the file hierarchy for something you need to restore, it's going to load more instantaneously for you so you can get to that data to restore it faster, and then it'll reach out to that object storage. You're also not incurring extra costs by searching that data locally before reaching out to that storage, and it can help with the backup process as well. And we select the object storage you'd want. I always encourage encrypting the data. You select your retention point from there. You can select whether or not you want to do a year down to days to 5 years, and then the option is also forever if you choose. And then you have options for item level retention and, of course, snapshot-based retention. And you can choose when that retention policy is actually met. Coming back under the organizations, we can take a look at what a job looks like. We have a flexible option for whether or not you want to back up your entire organization or go maybe based on a pay structure. How Amit was talking about earlier, you could separate your HR from maybe your IT and finance, and then separate which repository folder that they go to so you can keep track of a pay structure of who's using how much data to properly bill each department in your infrastructure. And the exclusions are just as dynamic, and it's as simple as selecting your server and your proc or the repository and then setting up your schedule. In this scenario, I have mapped my OneDrive locally to be able to quick access all of my files. I do it on probably most of my devices so that you're able to quickly download and upload without having to go through the online application. But as you can see, it's going to open me up to another type of attack, which is just a local encryption-based script that is going to encrypt this file for me locally, meaning that all of these files are getting simultaneously updated, and if you notice in the lower right-hand corner, those are already being uploaded back to the cloud, meaning even if I went to OneDrive online, I wouldn't be able to access those files properly. And that's kind of where Veeam Backup for Microsoft comes into place. These explorers all look very similar, and we can start from the latest point in time just by right-clicking on that job. You can use up at the top. Right now, I'm loading my local cache, meaning that I'm not even pulling anything down from the cloud yet and just looking at the file infrastructure and making sure that those files still look right. And I can overwrite the entire OneDrive because I know that those files are no longer good because, well, they were just all encrypted. It's simple as putting in a password and hitting the restore button. You'll almost instantaneously start to see files start to update with the proper modify date within your file store. All of this cloud infrastructure and mapping that OneDrive locally is so convenient. And as you can see, the files are already starting to come back here. And we'll see if we can get our template here. Now, all of our explorers do look all fairly similar. It's that same hierarchy where you see your organization, and as soon as you expand that organization, you can see all of the users under there. If you select certain jobs, you can narrow down that scope. In this case, we've got the scope for this user, and that document has been restored properly. And that's the demo that we had for you today. Did we have any questions?
I'll take it from here, Corinne. Thank you so much to both of you guys, Corinne and Amit, for your time. Really appreciate your presentation. That was very informative. We do have some time for questions, so I'll just go ahead and read these off. First question, how do you back up Microsoft Teams?
So backing up Microsoft Teams comes with an understanding of what Microsoft Teams is. Microsoft Teams is a front-end application for a lot of the back-end offerings that Microsoft offers. So say conversations between two people are actually orchestrated through Exchange Online. They're a back-end conversation folder inside of all of your Exchange mailboxes. When you have the collaborative SharePoint sites or the sites that you're talking with all of your other users within a group on Teams, you're actually communicating through the SharePoint Online application backend, and that's where your file store would also be for documents and files and tabs. If you're sending information back and forth between two users like a document, those are actually using the backend interface for OneDrive. So all of these back-end collaboration tools are where all of your data sits natively for the Teams application, and being able to go in and find those is part of just an education process. Now, there was a new API that Microsoft has opened up explicitly for Teams and being able to pull that metadata that will be integrating into Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365 version 5, which will offer a lot more native backup and restore options for the Teams application, but the data is still there. It's just a factor of getting that all in the same place with that metadata API.
Perfect. We'll move right into our next question. How secure is the backup in Cloudian?
Well, we called it hardened storage. So yeah, we pride ourselves at being a secure storage target for VBO and in general. Also, safeguarding sensitive company data, and in this case specifically, the lifeblood of your organization is not just good practice, but I think that's the primary requirement. From a HyperStore perspective, we have a bunch of security-related features within the platform. This starts with data in motion. So anytime you have data moving into Cloudian, pretty much you can have this done over SSL connectivity, over HTTPS protocol now. Veeam actually requires this. So whenever you look at the Veeam Cloudian connectivity, that itself is secure. Once the data lands in Cloudian, you can select from Veeam that it resides in encrypted format, or you can do this on the Cloudian side. So you can have your objects always be AES 256-bit encrypted on the server side. We also support secure shell. We can have IAM-based, IAM role-based access controls, and we also have audit trail logging. Those are for data protection and data security. We also support Veeam. So we are a fully certified Veeam storage, which means you can have a write once, read many type of scenarios going on, which can protect you also against threat of ransomware. Once you have the data written into Cloudian, you can put it under object lock for a certain period of time where this data becomes tamper-proof. So all in all, it is an extremely secure platform, and it also is certified as such by multiple government organizations.
Great, thanks for that. I'll move into our next question. I use litigation hold. Do I really need a backup?
Yeah, we did partially cover that in our presentation, but litigation hold is a legal compliance which has very limited fields on whether or not you're able to restore the location or back to the original location, exporting that data, or trying to only get it through an e-discovery process when you need to recover something for a user, which can be cumbersome. And you also have to think about this as a legal compliance hold versus a backup solution. Being in control of your data is very important to know where it's at, because you're responsible for that data in the end. Plus, with a litigation hold, you still do need to license that user, meaning that if a user does leave your company, you're still paying for them under their license.
Next question is this product part of Veeam Backup and Replication?
Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365 is actually a separate product line because it's for a separate type of backup than Veeam Backup and Replication. Veeam Backup and Replication is more so your physical, on-premises, and virtual environment. When Veeam Backup for Office 365 is for the Microsoft SaaS offering as a backup, which is why we've kept that as a separate product.
I think that concludes our questions for today. You can also find more information on our websites, Cloudian.com and Veeam.com, for more information. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us, and a huge thank you again to Corinne and Amit for the informative presentation. That was great, guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you all, and thank you, Audrey.